Welcome back. You're watching Biz Check. We are live and we are on air. My name is O'Brien Kimani. At O'Brien Kimani is my Twitter handle. At KBC Channel 1. We encourage your engagement with us. The question of the day is, do you think the Kenyan economy has grown in 2019? That is the question. Our SMS platform is open, and actually you can see it on your screen. At O'Brien Kimani, at KBC Channel 1. Get through to us, so that because we would want to hear your views. And remember, we have just finished discussing the health sector in the country, and the question is, how do you integrate innovation into the Kenyan health sector? You have had it all from the experts there. We want to now to change our hearts and talk about the economy. And joining us in the studio is Engineer Chris Ohanda. He's the chairman, or the national chairman, of the Kenya Institute of Supplies Management. Thank you so very much, Chris, for your time here.
Thank you, Brian.
First of all, I want retrospectively, what conclusions do you make economically for Kenya in the year 2019?
Statistics show that the economy has grown, and there hasn't always been a big dispute about the statistics and the numbers they spew out. The contention has always been, how do you translate this to connect with the common man?
Yeah.
Does the common man really identify with, understand, and agree that there is economic growth which touches their life? That's really the big debate that has always happened. It's how to translate that national figure of growth into every individual and business in the country. Yes.
There has always been, a debate as to when the GDP of a country is growing, sometimes it does not resonate with the people on the bottom of the pyramid. How do you ensure that GDP growth trickles down to the people on the bottom?
It depends on the priority investments into which you channel your investment, so that it actually affects and touches the welfare of the common person. For instance, if you look at the massive investment that we have had in various infrastructure and development projects in the country, which are a big catalyst for economic growth,
Yep.
And you see that the large number of them are either foreign company-based, in which case they bring in resources, work with them, and take out the benefits. To what extent have you engaged the local contractors so that they play an active role in actually that infrastructure investment and growth? That's what trickles to the common man back in the countryside, in the village. When you've got massive resources transferred to the counties as per the devolution, which is actually our national aspiration, and then you hear again at the same time that those whom you want to assist in the periphery, who have also invested in these projects in the counties, are not being paid. It means actually that you're not cascading the very shilling to where it's felt at the bottom line. So it depends on the projects you implement, how they affect the welfare of the people, the enablers that people touch, but more importantly, do you actually pay them, and they realize that benefit trickling down? Yes.
When you look at sectors, like manufacturing and agriculture, and we know for sure that 25% of the Kenyan economy is supported by agriculture. But when you look at investment, that goes into the agricultural sector, it's less than 10% of the total budget, and this actually is way below the Malabo Declaration, where countries are supposed to commit 10% of their national budget, to agriculture. Why is it that we invest so little in the sector that is expected to give back to the economy in a big way?
When you look at the macro considerations that a national government has to cater for, and also bearing in mind that this particular government has got a specific agenda. When you talk about the big four, okay, then you realize where the government priorities are with regard to committing resources. We are not at that stage where to education, to health, to agriculture, we are actually giving the ratios that have been recommended in the various international fora that we are part to and we have assigned to. To me, I think it's a case of prioritizing and what the government considers will have the highest impact to the citizen and to the legacy of the leadership that is there at the moment. That is always a continuous matching. And where that matching is not aligned to the expectations of the citizens, you can have economic growth figures, but there is that disconnect with the touch at the bottom.
And a very good example, that critics of GDP growth, have been pointing is a case of the SGR, the standard gauge railway line, which is a great concept, by the way. And, when you look at the investment that has gone into the SGR, the first part from Nairobi from Mombasa to Nairobi, cost about 320 billion shillings. In the second phase from Nairobi to Naivasha, was about 150 billion shillings. And so we are talking about almost half a trillion shillings, invested in one project. What would have been the impact of these resources being channeled towards the agriculture sector, for example?
Of course, enormous, completely enormous. It could have changed the life of this country in terms of agriculture efficiency and output, without a doubt. Those are massive resources. But when you look at government priorities with regard to where they have put this money, an investment like this one of SGR, you don't judge the outcome in a couple of years or in 10 years. This is a long-term game changer in terms of how it enables all other economies or other economic sectors, including the agriculture sector. So when you are a poor government, when you're a poor country like ours, we are not yet that rich, you are always prioritizing what do you invest where. And that's why the common man has got an obligation to always correct the government with their vote. Okay? Because that's the way they speak to the government. This is what you've done, and this is what I vote for to reward you or to sanction you. That's really the connection that there is. But by and large, we expect that these long-term, big, heavy investments have a trickle-down effect that affects the economy as it grows. For us as an association, procurement people, we've got this very tangible, continuous relationship with investment, because without the procurement people, you cannot have effective investment and growth in the Big Four. We play a big key cog in that. We also play a big key call that we enable the various budget holders to actually implement their projects, whether it's a big one like SGR or in the offices where we work. And it's always good to understand the role that procurement officers play in this matter. And I saw that even the BBI report actually took note of the importance of procurement and touched on some aspects of it. One of the recommendations that was there, which in our view is probably not well guided, is introduction of a rotation of every 2 years for officers from one station to another. Now, you need to understand that for you to have economic growth, you need a harmonized workforce that actually pushes the government agenda. And we see that some maybe well-meaning initiatives, but very misinformed in how they are translated, applicated, always seem to victimize the procurement people and always seem to cause them disharmony with regard to all those other public finance management staff, the auditors, the accountants, the procurement people. For instance, currently, the public service regulation states every 3 years you can be rotated. That's for all those PFM staff. Now you have this one report which actually says we single out, and for us we say you victimize the supplies practitioners and you give them a 2-year rotation. What that is going to have is a massive disruption of this staff's management of ongoing initiatives and projects, which has got a negative impact on the economy. Now, just to continue that, Brian, you saw last year there was again an executive order, which to us was quite overzealous because it was limited in its application, victimized a cadre of staff, when the executive had promised we are going to vet everybody, and they ended up vetting only the accountants, the procurement people. So we see this continuous application or invention of interventions which seem to victimize the very people you want to rely on on growing the economy.
We'll be revisiting that
Yeah,
issue, you
yeah.
know, in regard to what the BBI is saying, because those are just recommendations by BBI.
Yeah.
And we'll also
But
be
if you don't
finding out
check, if you don't check those recommendations on time, people tend to assume that they become a reality.
But we'll be coming back to find out, you know, whether, you know, as players in the industry, whether your input has been considered in the BBI. But let's go back to the issue that we are discussing here on HAD. Listen, you know, economy is a very complicated, you know, subject, and you cannot just leave it, you know, to technocrats to deal with it. You also want the people at the bottom of the pyramid, you know, to also understand what the people up there are doing.
Yes.
How do you breathe some sense into somebody who is in a far-flung area and has never actually gone to school on the benefits of a project like SGR vis-a-vis not putting up a school in their sublocation, for example?
I don't think that is easy to explain. Why, 50 years after independence, am I learning under a tree and I have no classroom? Yet you hear that in my neighborhood, if I'm Talo, for instance, there is big investment to enable this oil to get out to the port for export. Now, you ask a very valid question, which is a socio-political question, not just an economic one. Okay? How do you measure the impact of the investments? Now, nowadays, there is a trend of shifting in that economic growth and the impact of economic growth from mere numbers into even things like a happiness index, perception of the common man that I am feeling good, I am feeling happy, that the government is looking after me, is taking care of me. So we can't measure these things just by GDP, by indexes from the World Bank and from our treasury or from our central bank. It's got to be other things that people reconnect with and touch, so that everybody feels that the dollars or the shillings that are invested actually have a meaning for me as a common citizen, as a member of this country. That is the continuous debate and discussion we need to have. Fortunately for us as a country, we've grown in such a way that our society has embraced expression and free expression to an extent that you can't ignore even those village comments. And these days, with the modern social network communication, it is possible for those information to reach even the head of state within a very short time. So we can't say that people are blind to the realities, that there's a disconnect between the indices and the actual happiness of people or perception of satisfaction of the people with regard to economic growth. So it's a continuous challenge. But also, bear in mind that the task of a growing country like ours, which is not very rich, is continuous balance. Economics is, how do you divide the little you have amongst the very many other needs? And since these needs are sometimes socio-political, so then you also have my agenda, my big four agenda. This is really the things I want to do for the citizen of the country. This is what I feel I pledge to do. So you won't do the other 20 items that need to be done. And that is the political price that everybody has to pay to drive their agenda as per their manifesto. So it's a very complex aspect, but it comes out as an economic game plan at the end of the day. It's a complex subject. The villager does not need a complex answer. The village just needs to know, last year we had 4 classrooms. This year, we have 8. That's development. That's growth.
That's growth.
Last year, I couldn't go to the clinic other than on a bicycle. Now, a motorbike can come and pick me from my village. So infrastructure has actually reached where I am. That's how we measure it. And again, for me, I am very fond of going back always to our role as procurement officers. Whatever you do in macro, whether it's talking about the SGR or the small road to the village, the procurement officer is a facilitator. You cannot expect to develop unless there is full-blown attention to how procurement and supply chain grows within the country. How you look after that cadre. And currently, the sort of vibe that is on the ground, that every little turn you have to victimize the procurement cadre. Every little turn you have to take them for vetting away from everybody else. Every other turn now you are changing their scheme of service. I have been walking around recently visiting main procurement officers, and you'll be horrified, O'Brien, that many of them in public offices are actually struggling to even implement the legal framework because the regulations that they need, which should have been out from way back in 2016 when we had the new procurement law in 2015, are not there. And this is the legal framework that you expect to enable our president to implement the Big Four. Now, you keep asking yourself, how long will it take for us to enable these people, these agents of development, in getting the instruments they need? You go to offices, I've been around a little over the last few months, and you see staff who have not been promoted for 10 years. They are on the same grade. They watch other graduates come, and in a couple of years, they climb up. 4 or 5 years down the line, these guys are the bosses of these procurement officers. So really, let's look after this staff because they're a big enabler of either even foreign investment coming to set up shop or our own local investment, actually enabling at the counties, at the center, in the parastatals, things to happen with the investment we have there. So these aspects that we see thrown carelessly, for instance, like in the BBI report, these two, it sends a negative connotation, and it says we don't value the procurement officers, and we need to do something about it. I can only talk very positively about what my people, my members of the institute can do to enable the economy. And we have, as a nation, we have an obligation and a contract with them to treat them well, to stop the persecution that's been going on for ages, where anything happens, they are the first to be persecuted.
Well, one thing is for sure is that, procurement officers, they are critical in the cog of moving, of ensuring that, there is a proper supply of goods and services.
Yes.
But at the same time, the Kenyan citizenry, it seems like we are yet to swallow the whole idea that we now have to, we have a setup of devolved units, and also we have the national government. But every time we have issues, we want to cry to the national government. What is the role of county governments or devolved units in ensuring, number one, there is delivery of services, and there is also economic growth?
Very good question. Again, back to what my people, my professionals can do. Actually, two things happen at the counties. All those billions we give them, they pay salaries, and then the Council of Governors initiates projects which are procured, okay? So in terms of the governors and the devolved system ensuring that things happen at the counties, then we've got to embrace that partnership and serious professional adherence to the support of the procurement people at the counties so that they are considered core. What we have at the moment is a situation of Brian where I come in, I'm the new governor, the first people I take out are the procurement people. And these are career civil servants who have trained for years to do this work. So we've got to do something to the legal framework, to the scheme of service for them to avoid that disruption. Because projects are continuous, by the way, and experience of implementing them through a procurement process is also gained and accumulated over time. So both in the central government and in the parastatals and in the devolved systems, the best gift we can give to ourselves for development is ensure that we embrace procurement professionalism and work with the practitioners. And I also invite the Council of Governors to work with the Institute, KISM, and we devolve those skills there, and they are applied in a manner that delivers effective prices and effective services for the stakeholders at the counties. That's how we'll support economic growth at the counties. But until the key stakeholders recognize the importance and the seriousness of the procurement profession and our people at the counties, we will keep having initiatives like this one, where you have got a national project called BBI to improve our political well-being. And what do? You again sneak in technical things that are like this one, rotate procurement officers every 2 years, just to show you that in the psyche of many of our leaders and many of our stakeholders, they think procurement is a problem. Procurement is a solution. Without an effective management of procurement, the country will not realize this economic growth that you're talking about.
When you look at many scandals, that have or many corruption-related cases in this country, you always hear the word procurement department,
Yes.
Coming into play, or procurement officers, or the head of procurement. And Kenyans have come to be very cautious of procurement and procurement officers. How did we get there in the first place?
That's a very good question. It's got an historical connotation. Allow me to take you down the history path, okay? Right from the colonial times, the local governments were not doing procurement. Procurement was being done by the crown. Crown agents did procurement throughout the world for the colonies. When we gained independence, the crown agents didn't go away. They were there. And when they started exiting, they handed over procurement to very many other people, very many other departments in an amorphous manner. That's where you had mega central tender committees that managed aspects. It's only until the mid-2000s that there was a serious focus on the role of procurement as a profession in delivering the mandate of procurement for the users. Procurement don't have budgets. Procurement plays a facilitating role. Now, that historical aspect meant that in creating that cadre of staff, you are actually taking away responsibilities of procurement that were hitherto enjoyed by everybody else. And that started to create a rift. You don't hear about those scandals in the past. You only hear them now. But in reality, let me ask you the fruit in the pudding. Like last year, we had a major vetting of all heads of procurement. Do you know what happened? We had structured discussions with the executive on what was going on, and 100% of these people who wanted to come back came back, which showed that there is a bigger perception of these people are not clean when the reality is different. So over time, the other stakeholders who actually perpetrate a lot of procurement malpractice have been reacting and pushing back. When you are the corrupt person, you don't say I'm the corrupt person. You say that other person is the corrupt person. And procurement has been the tag that has always affected our staff. Over the years, you see many people being tried. How many procurement officers have actually been jailed? It's a perception. You start with, let's victimize this guy, and all the criminals who actually are sincerely very corrupt, they get away.
Let me ask you
now,
this.
The advocacy journey that we are starting now is one where we say we must communicate to the stakeholders very clearly. We must embrace the self-discipline. We are putting in place from January the disciplinary committee of the institute. That means we will own our own discipline, and we will safeguard and ring-fence our members from wrongful and victimized accusations. So we say we'll deal with our own, okay? And when it's beyond us, then it can go to the multi-agencies, okay? And we are also saying we develop a framework, which we have started discussing with the multi-investigative agencies, so that they also have skills of identifying that procurement is not a problem, it's actually a partner. So when they come into an organization and they are doing audits, investigations, the first victim is not procurement, it's the users, the technical people who have for a long time been subverting the procurement process. These, when you hear that corruption fights back, it's actually reality. You fight back by pushing the blame to the least vulnerable people.
Tell me this.
And that's what has happened to our people in this
when you
case.
go, when you traverse this country, I mean, when you go to the counties, when you go to wherever, you see very many abandoned projects.
Yes.
You see projects that are almost becoming white elephants. And when you ask what actually is happening here, you hear that. And these are projects, that are supposed to spur regional
growth.
as well as national economic growth.
You're right, O'Brien.
And when you ask what exactly is happening to this market, I mean, it's yet to be completed. They'll tell you money is stuck, or we are all stuck at the procurement phase. How do we sanitize the procurement department and people involved in procurement to ensure, number one, the citizenry get value. For the services and goods they are procuring, and at the highest quality possible?
Very good question. First of all, let's go back to the role of the procurement officer within the process. The procurement officer is a facilitator. Is a cog that facilitates the implementation of the procurement law to enable the users who want to build a market. A market is not built by a procurement officer. A market is built by a user who needs to provide marketing services to the citizens. So he instigates a budget to be created and a plan, and with the procurement officer, they develop the specifications for tendering for that. The budget in its entirety belongs to and is the responsibility of the user. Now, the law specifies we shouldn't start that project unless there is an assured budget to complete it. The procurement officer, using the procurement instruments that are there, the procurement law, then facilitates the user to tender and get the best prices from the most qualified suppliers. And they start a project implementation. And the project implementation is then governed by a project team, which looks after that. In all that, the procurement officer is actually a facilitator. But what the citizen and common person sees, this is a procurement. If it goes wrong, procurement has gone wrong. When in reality, there are so many other dimensions that could cause that project to become a white elephant. Either the user had wrong specifications, or the user was doing a project in which what's in it for me is not what's in it for the market, the people there, okay? Now, all these other factors sometimes stall projects, and none of those factors point the finger at the procurement person. But because this process is given a procurement title, a procurement message, it then leads to people seeing this is a failed procurement and the procurement officer, when actually it's a procurement process which involves very many stakeholders. And I agree, we need to improve our advocacy and communication and ensure that our stakeholders understand and they participate in that project, including querying what's in it for us. This is our project, or this is not our project. We don't need the marketplace here. We need a stand for motorbikes, as an example. Yeah? So that is a user problem, which when it fails, it's translated into a procurement problem, and that we refuse. That's why, O'Brien, in many of these scandals that you hear around the country, now you have started seeing the reality that the least affected persons in terms of successful prosecution is the procurement officer, because he plays the least role. Now you have seen multi-billion projects going sour. It's the executives who are incarcerated.
When you look at the corruption perception index that was released by GEOPOL, almost 70% of the respondents are saying that or they deemed the procurement officers and procurement department as a very corrupt area. And
perception.
Yes, that's what I say, corruption perception index.
Perception is very powerful.
The reality on the ground may be different.
It may be very different.
It could be 95%, it could be 10%, it could be 0%.
Yes.
That's why we are saying corruption perception index. And how do we ensure, or how do we craft a new image for procurement departments and procurement officers? Because at the end of the day, we are not going to operate without them.
They are a core.
They are very important, because our goods and services are not going to be procured without them.
I'll give you an answer of what we are going to do going forward. And this is part of the national discussion we are having with our over 5,000 members at the moment. There is an instrument which created us. It is called the Supplies Practitioners Management Act of 2007. Okay? Now that spells out who can be a procurement officer, okay? And we've got in there 3 key instruments. First, there is the examination and certifying committee that examines and certifies who can practice. Then there's the registration committee, which registers only those people who are qualified and gives them a certificate to practice in the industry, okay? And then there is the most important of all those, there is the disciplinary committee. We need to operationalize these 3 from the coming year in the beginning of 2020, so that they play a key role, especially the registration committee, in weeding out people who shouldn't practice, who are practicing. And in so doing, actually we have identified that there will be at least 4,000 or 5,000 new jobs for new graduates that are there occupied by people who shouldn't be doing that. And remember, if a wrong person is doing procurement against the law, is being inefficient, first and foremost. Secondly, is occupying a place that a qualified person should occupy. So our promise to our young graduates is that there will be jobs that once we implement this act, it will actually create those. Number 2, once then we identify that there are problems of infiltrators or executives who actually pollute the process by recruiting people who are not, then we have a disciplinary mechanism in there. First of all, we are not saying that every procurement officer is a clean officer. We are a Kenyan society. We also do have some bad apples in our midst. With the disciplinary committee, we are able to ring fence these people and bring them in for internal sanction and internal discipline. That is the first way to earn respect from your peers and the community. That you can identify wrongdoers, you can sanction them. Or even when they are wrongfully accused and victimized, you can take them in and provide the first line of defense for them to sanitize their name so that they walk out innocent as they were before that wrongful victimization. So there are many initiatives for us to do, but primary around that is to ensure that we've got effective men and women in the leadership of the institute. By the way, we are going for elections in January, and we expect to bring in a crop of people who will be charged by society to implement this act reasonably well. That's why I'm very confident that our future is bright. With implementation of these instruments, we will have a mechanism to cause better communication and also to use these committees to ring fence and protect our people and also contribute better to the growth of the economy.
Let's look at, last year when there was an executive order issued by the presidency, demanding that all procurement officers, the head of procurement department and the chief accountant, to step aside to allow a lifestyle audit of these officers. I mean, we are yet to know what exactly transpired.
I know what transpired.
Oh, you know?
Yes, I know what transpired.
So we would want to find out exactly what transpired. And, well, life moved on without them. So the question is, do we need...
Life didn't move on. O'Brien, let me bring this, which is my camera.
Yeah.
Which is my camera?
Let's use number 2, yeah.
Number 2 here. Yeah. It's that one.
I mean, camera 5. This is 5.
Let me bring this very clearly to the Kenyan citizens. The economy suffered when all the heads of procurement actually were sent home. It was not business as usual. They were deputized, and their deputies took up meaningful roles, but you cannot get rid of hundreds of qualified, top-performing civil servants and you expect life to go on. It did go on. It went on at the pace that was different. Number 2, that exercise, well intended as it might have been sold by the executive, missed a very big mark because the executive promised us, we are going to vet everybody. You remember, the president said, starting from me, going to the deputy, then we'll vet everybody else. Actually, we are waiting for the president and the deputy and the others to be vetted. They only vetted our 2 officers, the procurement officer and the finance manager.
Do we have people who actually never came back out to the offices?
Yes, we do. In the procurement teams, 100% of the people who intended to come back, came back, 100% of them. I took part myself in very detailed discussions and presentations to key stakeholders of what is it that our people do. We wrote, we went to the PSC. For us, we escalated up the ladder. We went up to the deputy president to explain this matter. And he was very cordial at the end of the day, and he said, okay, Chris, there are just about 8 files left. It's from your group. We'll take care of them. And they did. All of them are back. The finance managers, on the other hand, there are quite a number who never came back because we, the management of KISM, took a very proactive role in interceding, in explaining the role for our people. But more importantly, for the Kenyan citizen to know, is that whereas we started with the perception that these procurement officers will be found very guilty, it was a vindication for the procurement officers that the bulk of them are innocent, hard-working people who pay mortgages. They are suffering like all of us through bank interest and all that. They are not people who have unexplained wealth. We may have 1 or 2. They were not in that group. Okay? So I return a kudos to our heads of procurement that they stood in there, they explained themselves on our behalf, and they brought a sanitized image of us. We now need to leverage on that and say, last year we went through the fire. We came out, we were vindicated for our conduct and our wealth and everything we have done. Now we need to cascade that so that if any other thing arises again, it should not just affect us. It should be targeted broadly and widely. And for us, going back to the economic equation, you cannot have meaningful economic growth in a country where you continuously victimize and continuously point the finger in the eye of the procurement fraternity. They will not feel part and parcel of an appreciated, recognized, and valued member of that economic angle. And for me, I'd like to urge the president to ensure that through the executive, our people are respected, our people grow in cadre, our people get the instruments they need, the regulations that our people have suffered. They're implementing 2015 law using a 206 regulation. you are actually setting these people for failure. Every day they do any tender, you are setting them up for failure. And how will that contribute to economic growth? That's why we're saying, let's have those regulations out. In terms of scheme of service, our procurement officers have suffered the most in this country, in the civil service. They don't get promotions. They get overlooked. And they stay in ranks forever.
How do you explain that? That they don't get promotion, because sometimes promotion is based on merit. How do you support your argument that they don't get promoted? Their scheme of service is different and so much.
Their scheme of service is not different. It's just not applied for them. In this particular case, the civil service should be answering this question for us, because when you say promotion is on merit, it flies in the face of the statistics we are talking about. If you're talking about economic growth, if we are talking about seeing things happen in the economy, and we've just agreed with you in this discussion that a procurement officer is a central cog in the facilitation of spending that causes growth in the economy, then the procurement officer cadre is actually working in this country. And you couldn't have economic growth if the procurement officer didn't deserve promotion. So if we are seeing economic growth, these officers need to be promoted. These officers need to see also them in their private life realize growth. They have school fees to pay. They have mortgages to pay. They can see the economists growing. They can see the engineers growing. So they also need to grow and feel part and parcel of the family. We are saying these guys deliver.
What are the reasons for procurement officers not being promoted? I mean, I don't have statistics, to support your argument. I don't know whether you have statistics, from the Public Service Commission.
By the way, I have been doing a lot of walking. I told you that we've got an election coming in January. So over the last 3 months, I have done a lot of walking in public offices.
Walking?
Walking. Literally walking, listening, shaking hands of officers. And the bulk of them are suffering from lack of promotion.
Why?
Promotion hasn't come to them. They can see the gap between the heads of procurement and our people are so. Do they apply? My friend, is there a Kenyan who will not apply for a promotion? Everybody will apply for a promotion when one is there.
Do they inquire why they were never promoted on promotion?
Brian, I think the next time you give me an opportunity to come here, I'll come with the civil servants. I'll get 2-3 of them.
That would be very
good. And together, we actually have a lively... Now you see me as a mouthpiece for their welfare. And really, the mouthpiece is saying, our people have suffered. My members have suffered. They need to be given their due share for causing this economy to grow so significantly. We have burst the myth that our members are corrupt and filthy. There might be 1 or 2. I must be a sincere Kenyan to say that. But from last year's exercise of a very rigorous vetting, walking through the fire, they actually tell chairman, we walked through the valley of death. We walked through fire, and we came out on the other side. What does that mean? That our members have been vetted and they have been certified that if they are the heads and they are clean and they are certified as okay to do service, so their cadre which they manage is equally certified. That myth of procurement are the corrupt people is actually a myth of corruption fights back. Everybody who is corrupt, including the merchants, they point fingers, DCI should follow those ones, ESC should follow, so that way they have got time to get away. And it's a real myth which needs to be broken by sensitization, effective communication, and better protection of our members from all those accusing them.
Chris, because time is not on our end, let me ask you this. How do we streamline our procurement procedures for them to facilitate economic growth?
We actually have done that. Very sincerely, we have done that. From 2005, that's when we started breaking the back of this problem. We created a legal framework for the very first time that we improved in 2015, okay? And on top of that, we are loading onto it various degrees of automation. You have heard of IFMIS. Now, the best way to get value and consistency from a procurement process is to ensure that it's got a proper legal framework that's documented that people follow. Then there are working tools that are also being developed from time to time. That is tools that they use for evaluation of tenders, for communication to suppliers, etc. That is in place. So the framework and the mechanism is in place. It is when you have a mismatch, like you have a 2015 Act and a 2006 regulation. It's like you have got a new Mercedes and you are being asked to use the driving manual of the previous version, which is 10 years old. You can see inefficiency there. If we can close this gap, and the Treasury has actually said this is almost at the very tail end. They have liaised with all the stakeholders, including ourselves, and to give fairness to them, the director, Mr. Koril, has said, Chairman, this has come to an end. We're really at the very end of it. But the very fact that you have that mismatch reduces the effectiveness of that framework on which we have invested so much. And if you remember, O'Brien, Article 227 of the Constitution is very, very clear. It demands of us, all citizens, to ensure that when we employ public money, we do it efficiently, we do it effectively and prudently. Yep. Okay, and transparently. You know, so let's marry all those instruments, the Act and the regulations, and save our people. Lastly, let's motivate our procurement officers. Let's ensure they are promoted. Let's ensure that they are given recognition. And right now, the Act requires that they report to the CEO. Many of them actually report to the CEO in rank only. We need to promote them so that they are actually number 2 in reporting to the CEO in rank and file, so that even their package is that of I'm number 2, and then they pull everybody from behind.
That can only be determined by the Public Service Commission.
Precisely. I speak for my members in line with the employers.
But the issue at hand, going back to the topic that we've been having here, yes, on economic growth. When you look at, we are at the tail end of the year 2019.
Yes.
Very soon we are jumping into the year 2020. What do you see happening economically? What are the things do you think will shape economic environment in 2020?
In all sincerity, I see the proper application of the procurement frameworks, okay, enabled by regulations, yeah, that enable people at the county especially to liberate the spend and pay for all those people who take part in providing county service. Yesterday I had a senior executive from the government actually really lambasting and languishing at all these pending bills that are not getting paid. You can't have economic growth in 2020 if you are not solving problems of 2019. So as we move forward, financial discipline is going to be a big factor. And I commit on behalf of my members from the supply chain profession that we'll facilitate the growth to the next stage of the Big Four agenda by ensuring that we apply the regulations for the 2015 law so that procurement is efficient and it's speedy and it reduces all these cases that are there, appeals, so that when you procure, you effectively and quickly move into implementation. There are many other aspects of balancing that the government in its macro nature of consideration of the economy will engage into, but I speak with the expertise of what our role will be in enabling. We are not going to move away from the Big Four as the government program, but it's what shall we do more effectively? And more importantly, how shall we partner with KEPSA, yeah, with the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce? How shall we master this relationship with these two enterprises so that we enable SMEs, we enable AGPO to work properly, okay? We enable devolution to work for our citizens. We enable foreign investment that comes in, yeah, being matched by Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and linking in the local market with increase in local content by KEPSA members. All those are things that we must ensure that we embrace and do. And my institute, with my members, we are here to help this economy grow and make things happen for Kenya. That's really our 2020 promise for this country and for the president and for the executive and for the private sector through KEPSA and through Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industries. That's really our promise to them.
That's your promise.
Yeah.
Chris, thank you so very much indeed for finding time to be with us this morning. Now it's approaching afternoon, and if we don't happen to see you again in 2019, why don't you see you in 2020?
O'Brien, Merry Christmas, and let's continue this partnership of communication between KBC and the Institute for the benefit of Kenyans and for the growth of our economy, and more importantly, for ensuring that they understand the role of the procurement officer and how long they have been victimized, and we are moving away from that.
We'll
to
continue
ensure
to
they take a
engage
central
when the
place.
need arises.
We will engage.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. God bless.
Chris Ohanda, engineer, is the national chairman of the Kenya Institute of Supplies Management, joining us here to discuss various issues, touching on procurement as well as economic growth. You wouldn't want to believe it that we've been here for the last 1 hour.
Wow.
Yeah, time flies pretty fast, especially when you're having constructive discussions. Well, remember, it has been a packed and loaded morning and afternoon, right? I mean, we've been discussing, issues ranging from health, economic growth to procurement. Lord Jesus. Yeah, you agree with me, it has been very tough. But here we are. It's now approaching 12 o'clock. And guess what? Tamrini is coming up next. My name is O'Brien Kimani. Remember, we have another date with you tonight at 10 on Inside Government, as we look back at the year 2019 and how various government directives and policies as well as agenda, shaped the year that was. My name is O'Brien. Thank you very much for your time. Have a good afternoon. Stay here for Tamrini.
Thank you.